The truth about getting rich in 2026. Let's be honest about something most people don't want to hear. Getting rich in 2026 has nothing to do with motivation, luck, or waiting for the right idea. That era is over. The game today is simple. Either you understand how money moves, or you stay exactly where you are financially. Most people are still thinking like employees in a world that now rewards owners, builders, and people who understand leverage. They chase income instead of control. They want comfort instead of cash flow. And then they wonder why nothing changes. Here's the truth. Wealth in 2026 is not built on effort. It's built on structure. If your money is not working while you sleep, you are not in the wealth game. You are in the survival game. And I'll make this even clearer. If you cannot explain how your income scales without you physically working more hours, you don't have a business. You have a job with extra stress. So before we talk about getting rich, we need to fix one assumption. You are not underpaid, you are under-leveraged. Financial discipline is the entry fee to wealth. I want to be clear about what that actually means in practice, because most people misunderstand discipline as restriction, when in reality it is control over financial direction. Every decision I make with money either strengthens my position or weakens it, and there is no neutral ground. If I spend without structure, I am not just reducing my balance, I am shaping a future where I will always need more income just to stay in the same place. That is the cause and effect most people never calculate. They think a single purchase is small, but they ignore the pattern that purchase creates over years. Wealth is not built in moments, it is built in repetition. Every time I receive money, I am making a decision that either builds capital or destroys it. If I prioritize consumption, I train my behavior to eliminate surplus. If I prioritize saving and allocation, I build the foundation for investment. That is the difference between staying in survival mode and entering ownership thinking. An owner does not ask what they can buy next, they ask how capital can be preserved and multiplied. That shift alone changes financial outcomes over time. Financial discipline is not about avoiding spending entirely, it is about understanding hierarchy. I evaluate every dollar based on its future value, not its present satisfaction. If money leaves my control without creating return, I treat it as lost opportunity, not just expense. That mindset forces better decisions. It forces me to think in terms of cash flow instead of emotion, in terms of assets instead of liabilities, in terms of long-term positioning instead of short-term comfort. Most people fail financially because their habits are reactive. They earn, they spend, and whatever is left is ignored. That structure guarantees stagnation. I reverse that process. I decide what portion of money becomes capital before I decide what becomes consumption. That one adjustment creates accumulation. And accumulation is the starting point of all wealth. Without capital, there is nothing to invest. Without investment, there is no growth. Without growth, there is no financial freedom. I also understand that protecting capital is more important than chasing returns. Many people lose money not because opportunities are bad, but because they enter them without structure. They evaluate reward first and risk second. That is backwards. I evaluate risk first. If the downside is not controlled, I do not participate, no matter how attractive the upside looks. Wealth is not built by chasing everything that moves. It is built by surviving long enough with capital intact to compound it intelligently. Every disciplined financial decision I make today reduces pressure on my future. Every undisciplined decision increases it. That is the simple equation. Over time, those decisions compound into completely different financial realities. One path leads to dependence on income forever. The other path leads to control over income generation itself. So when I talk about discipline, I am not talking about limitation. I am talking about structure. Structure in spending, structure in saving, structure in investing, and structure in thinking. Because money always follows structure. And if I do not control it, it will control me. That is the entry fee. And there is no exception to it. Emotional decisions are the fastest way to lose money. I treat this as one of the most important rules in wealth building, because emotion is where capital goes to die. Every financial mistake I have ever seen, whether in markets, business, or personal spending, comes back to the same root cause. Decisions made under emotional pressure instead of rational structure. Fear makes people exit too early. Greed makes them enter too late. Excitement makes them ignore risk. And ego makes them defend bad decisions even when the numbers are clearly against them. The cause and effect is simple but brutal. When I allow emotion to guide financial decisions, I break consistency. And when consistency breaks, strategy collapses. Without strategy, money becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability is the enemy of wealth. Wealth requires repeatable systems, not reactive behavior. Every time I react emotionally, I shift from being an investor into being a participant in chaos. That is not a position that builds long-term value. I focus on one principle above everything else: capital protection before opportunity. Emotional thinking reverses that order. It focuses on potential reward first and ignores downside risk. That is how people overexpose themselves financially. They do not calculate loss, they imagine gain. But in real wealth building, survival comes first. If I lose capital, I lose time, and if I lose time, I lose compounding. That is the real cost of emotional decisions. I also understand that emotions are reinforced through repetition. If I repeatedly make impulsive financial choices, I train myself into instability. That habit compounds just like investments do. The difference is that this compounding works against me. Small emotional decisions do not feel dangerous in isolation, but over time they create a pattern of poor allocation, bad entries, and weak exits. The result is not one big failure, it is slow financial erosion. To counter that, I operate with structure. I evaluate every decision through rules, not feelings. If an opportunity does not meet my criteria for risk control, cash flow potential, and long-term value creation, I ignore it regardless of how attractive it feels in the moment. That discipline removes emotional interference from the equation. It forces me to think like an owner instead of a gambler. An owner does not chase excitement. An owner protects assets, allocates capital carefully, and focuses on predictable returns over time. Another key factor is patience. Emotional decision-making thrives on impatience. It pushes people to act quickly without full understanding. But wealth is built through calculated waiting. I would rather miss an opportunity than enter a bad one. Because missing an opportunity only costs potential gain, but a bad decision costs real capital. That difference determines long-term survival. I also measure success by process, not emotion. If I follow the right process, even a short-term loss is acceptable because the system remains intact. But if I break process due to emotion, even a short-term gain is dangerous because it rewards bad behavior. That is how people slowly destroy wealth without realizing it. They confuse lucky outcomes with good decisions. At the core, I remind myself that money responds to behavior. If my behavior is emotional, my financial results become unstable. If my behavior is disciplined, my financial results become predictable. And in wealth creation, predictability is power. It allows me to scale, reinvest, and compound without fear-driven interruptions. So I eliminate emotion from execution. I do not eliminate it from awareness, I eliminate it from control. That separation is what keeps capital intact and strategy alive. Because in the end, emotion is expensive and discipline is profitable. Long-term wealth is built on ownership, not income. I want to be extremely precise about this because misunderstanding this principle keeps most people financially stuck for life. Income gives me survival. Ownership gives me leverage. And leverage is what creates scale. If I only rely on income, I am permanently tied to time. That means my financial growth is capped by how many hours I can work, how much I can sell, or how much energy I can personally deliver. That is linear thinking. And linear thinking does not create wealth at scale. The cause and effect here is very direct. When I depend only on income, my financial outcome is always proportional to effort. If I stop working, money stops. If I slow down, income slows down. That creates pressure and instability. But when I shift into ownership thinking, I change the structure entirely. Now my money, assets, or systems begin producing returns independently of my daily effort. That is where compounding begins. And compounding is the foundation of long-term wealth. I approach financial decisions by asking one question: does this increase ownership or does it only increase income? If it only increases income, it is temporary. If it increases ownership, it builds future value. Ownership can be in many forms. It can be equity in a business, cash flow generating assets, scalable systems, or anything that produces return without requiring constant personal input. The key principle is that my money must start working instead of me constantly working for money. Poor financial thinking focuses on consumption and immediate income satisfaction. That creates a cycle where money comes in and disappears just as fast. There is no accumulation, no asset building, and no long-term structure. The effect of that behavior is dependency. Dependency on a job, dependency on market timing, dependency on external conditions. That is not financial freedom. That is financial vulnerability. When I think like an owner, my entire decision-making process changes. I stop asking what I can afford today and start asking what asset I can build or acquire. That increases future cash flow. That shift changes everything because assets do not just store value, they generate value. And when value is generated consistently, I gain control over time. I am no longer forced to trade time for money indefinitely. Risk evaluation also becomes different. I do not chase returns blindly. I evaluate whether an opportunity strengthens my ownership position or weakens it. If it requires capital, I ask what return it produces and how stable that return is. If it does not contribute to long-term cash flow or equity growth, I treat it as consumption, not investment. That mindset protects capital and forces better allocation. Another key factor is repetition. Wealth through ownership is not built through one decision. It is built through consistent allocation into value-producing assets over time. Every disciplined decision adds a layer. Every undisciplined decision removes progress. That is why small habits matter. Over years, those habits determine whether I own meaningful assets or just generate temporary income. I also understand that ownership creates freedom because it reduces dependency. When income is diversified through ownership structures, I gain stability. That stability allows me to take better risks, make better decisions, and avoid emotional financial behavior. It creates a feedback loop where discipline produces stability, and stability reinforces discipline. At the core, this principle is simple. Income keeps me active. Ownership builds my future. One is effort-based, the other is system-based, and systems scale in ways effort never can. So I do not measure success by how much I earn in a month. I measure it by how much I own, how much cash flow is being generated without my presence, and how effectively my capital is compounding over time. Because real wealth is not about working harder. It is about owning smarter. Personal accountability determines financial direction. I treat this principle as non-negotiable because every financial result I see in my life is directly connected to the decisions I make, not the conditions I blame. The market does not target me personally. The economy does not single me out. The system simply responds to behavior, and my behavior determines my outcome. That means if I want a different financial future, I cannot negotiate with reality. I have to change my execution. The cause and effect here is very simple but extremely uncomfortable for most people to accept. If I make careless spending decisions, I reduce my ability to build capital. If I avoid responsibility and blame external factors, I stop improving my strategy. If I delay action, I lose time, and time is the most important asset in wealth creation. Every delay compounds into missed opportunities. Every excuse becomes a financial cost that shows up later as lack of progress. When I accept full accountability, my thinking shifts immediately. I stop asking why things are hard and start asking what decisions I need to change. That shift is where financial progress begins. Because accountability forces action, and action creates results. Without accountability, there is no urgency to improve financial behavior. And without improvement, outcomes remain the same. I also understand that wealth is not built through isolated good decisions. It is built through consistent execution of disciplined decisions. One smart financial move does not change my life. A pattern of smart financial behavior does. And that pattern only forms when I stop blaming circumstances and start controlling inputs. Inputs are spending, saving, investing, and effort allocation. Outputs are financial results. If I want to change outputs, I must control inputs. Poor financial outcomes are almost always a reflection of repeated behavior, not one mistake. Overspending becomes a habit. Ignoring savings becomes a pattern. Delaying investment becomes a mindset. These behaviors compound over time, and the effect is financial stagnation. On the other hand, disciplined behaviors also compound. Saving consistently, investing strategically, and protecting capital all build momentum that eventually becomes financial strength. I think in terms of ownership, even when discussing accountability, because an owner never blames external conditions for internal performance. An owner evaluates what can be controlled and acts on it. That mindset eliminates victim thinking. And victim thinking is one of the biggest barriers to wealth creation because it removes responsibility from the equation. I also focus heavily on protecting capital. If I lose capital due to poor decisions, I lose not just money but future opportunity. That is why I evaluate every decision through risk before reward. If the downside is not acceptable, I do not proceed. That discipline ensures I stay in control of my financial trajectory instead of reacting to volatility or pressure. Another important aspect of accountability is consistency. Wealth is not built in bursts of effort. It is built through repeated execution of correct decisions. If I save once, nothing changes. If I invest once, nothing stabilizes. But if I repeat disciplined financial actions over time, the structure of my financial life changes completely. That is the power of accountability combined with consistency. I do not measure success by external circumstances. I measure it by whether my financial behavior aligns with my long-term goals. If there is a gap, I adjust my behavior, not my expectations. That approach keeps me focused on execution rather than excuses. At the end of the day, accountability is not about guilt or pressure. It is about control. Because when I take full responsibility, I gain full control. And control is the foundation of wealth building. So I keep it simple. My results reflect my decisions. My decisions reflect my discipline. And my discipline determines my future. Business decisions must be based on return, not preference. I want to be very clear about this because most financial failure does not come from lack of opportunity. It comes from emotional preference disguised as decision making. If I choose based on what feels comfortable, familiar, or exciting, I am not building wealth. I am simply expressing taste. And taste has nothing to do with financial performance. Wealth responds to return, not preference. The cause and effect is straightforward. When I make decisions based on preference, I ignore efficiency. I choose what I like instead of what performs. That leads to capital being tied up in low return or no return situations. Over time, that weakens cash flow and slows down compounding. But when I make decisions based on return, I force discipline into every allocation. I ask what this decision produces, how fast it produces it, and what risk is involved. That structure creates consistency, and consistency is what builds financial strength. Every dollar I control has a job. Either it is building an asset, improving cash flow, or increasing future earning potential. If it is not doing any of those things, it is not working for me, it is being consumed. That distinction is critical. Most people do not track how their money works. They only track how it is spent. That creates financial leakage. I reverse that approach completely. I treat money as working capital, not spending power. Thinking like an owner changes how I evaluate everything. An owner does not ask what feels good today. An owner asks what produces sustainable return tomorrow. That means I constantly evaluate opportunities through a return lens. If something does not improve my financial position, I do not justify it emotionally. I reject it based on structure. That discipline protects capital and keeps me focused on long-term growth instead of short-term distraction. Risk evaluation always comes before reward. If I cannot clearly understand downside risk, I do not proceed. Because unclear risk always leads to hidden losses. And hidden losses destroy long-term wealth silently. Many people focus on upside potential and ignore downside exposure. That imbalance creates instability. I eliminate that by making risk clarity a requirement before any financial decision. I also focus heavily on cash flow. Cash flow is what sustains everything. Assets that do not produce cash flow often become liabilities over time. That is why I prioritize decisions that generate consistent returns instead of speculative outcomes. Predictable cash flow allows reinvestment. Reinvestment creates compounding. And compounding is what transforms small capital into significant wealth over time. Poor financial decisions usually come from emotional attraction to appearances instead of actual performance. People buy liabilities thinking they are assets. They chase growth without stability. They invest without understanding structure. The result is always the same. Capital gets trapped or lost, and financial pressure increases. That pattern repeats because the decision-making process is wrong, not because opportunities are missing. I approach every decision with one question. Does this strengthen my financial position or weaken it? Strength means higher return, stronger cash flow, or improved control over capital. Weakness means reduced liquidity, unnecessary risk, or emotional spending. That filter keeps decisions aligned with long-term strategy instead of short-term preference. Over time, these decisions compound. Good decisions repeated consistently create financial momentum. Bad decisions repeated consistently create financial decay. There is no neutral outcome. Every financial action either builds structure or destroys it. At the core, this principle is about discipline over desire. Desire is temporary, return is measurable, and wealth is built on measurable outcomes, not emotional satisfaction. So I keep my focus simple. I do not ask what I prefer, I ask what performs. Because in business and in wealth creation, performance always wins over preference. Now I want you to be honest with yourself. Everything you just heard is not theory. It is a mirror. Your financial future is already being shaped by the decisions you are repeating today, not someday, today. If you are spending without structure, you are building dependence. If you are avoiding investment, you are delaying compounding. If you are making emotional financial decisions, you are paying for them with your future. Wealth is not a secret. It is a system of discipline, ownership thinking, risk control, and consistent execution. The question is not whether this works. The question is whether you are willing to apply it long enough for it to matter. So here is the challenge. Stop thinking like a consumer managing money for comfort. Start thinking like an owner deploying capital for return. Track your decisions. Control your impulses. Demand structure from your financial behavior, because at the end of the day, income does not define your future. Your discipline does. And the moment you take control of that discipline, your financial direction stops being